Please welcome former NFL star, corporate diversity, inclusion, and culture consultant, Wade Davis.
So we're going to have some fun right now. We have men talking about gender equality and our role and our work in it. I'm excited to be joined by three amazing gentlemen right here. Let's give these gentlemen a big round of applause. So I cheated a little bit and I gave them the questions about 20 minutes ago because I changed them up and they're kind of hard and difficult, but I pushed them on purpose. So forgive them if they say something that is not like perfect because I literally changed all of the questions on purpose. So the first question is my softball one, right? Is that as you think about, the tagline, moment of truth, what was your moment of truth when it came to you understanding the importance of gender equality and wanting to go from self-awareness to allyship to becoming an actual gender equality advocate? And I'll start with you.
Yeah, so for me, I think of my wife, really. My wife is a doctor. I've been with her we've been together for over 20 years at this point, married for over 10. So for me, I've seen her go through med school, through residency, and it's very difficult for a woman of color to be a doctor in a very much male-dominated sort of industry. And so when she would come home and tell me some of the stories of some of the things that she would have to deal with, it hurts.
Yeah,
it hurts her, it hurts me. And so I think for me it's been a cumulative effect. It's just stories that I hear from her. And literally this week there has been experiences that she's had at her office where it's very difficult. And tough decisions are going to have to be made very soon. So I think for me, it's just being with her through the tough times, hearing her stories. It's something that it's incredibly personal for me. And so I take those experiences with me in my daily life, in my office and through social occasions.
Was there a specific story that she told you that really kind of changed your understanding that her life was so vastly different from yours?
Yeah, I mean, for her, it's like she gets the tough cases at the office. She's an anesthesiologist. And for her, it almost seems like she gets the harder cases, the harder schedules, if you will. She gets those patients that are much more fragile, and the margin of error is incredibly small. And so for her, she recognizes that and she sees that. And so it's an immediate thing because for her, she's like, why doesn't this man or this other person get that case? Why am I the one that's always being placed in that position? So for me, it's those stories that really hit home for me and really make me recognize that there's a lot of work to be done and require my self-awareness and advocacy and alliance, not only for her, but for the other women that I work with as well.
Thank you so much. Bing, what was your moment of truth?
Well, the annoying answer is there's many moments of truth for everyone.
We ain't gonna do that today.
No, I think just to piggy off Gio, I think it's once again as a woman. It's my mother. We've been together for 30 years. 30 and 9 months. More intentional dater than Gio. No, but I distinctly remember it was. I think we still have video of this, but it was 3 years old, and I had overalls on because that was her choice. And she asked me. She goes, "Big," or she goes, "Binga," which means big. She goes, "What's the first thing you do when you get married?" And I say, "Of course, it's
have sex." Sorry.
By all means, you should wait that long. God bless you. No, I said, "Get a ring." It's the first thing you do when you get married when you're 3 years old. And my mother immediately retorts with, "No, get a prenup." And I thought,
wasn't ready for that.
So for all y'all who are Asian or Jewish, which is culturally similar, you know what I'm talking about because you've had the same story, right? And the reason this was poignant to me is we chastised her years later. "Mom, you're jading our thoughts on consummate love and so forth. It's bad." And I remember I was 10 at that time. She said, "No, Bing, Mommy and Daddy love each other, but you never know." and I just remember thinking, like, in my culture, and unfortunately in certain ethnicities, the man chooses the relationship. So much so that in some instances, it's literally arranged, right? So, and this still happens, by the way, in 2018, right? And I just remember thinking, if the woman in my house has the say over this transaction, and she's able to navigate both sides so deftly, right? The right and the left, the love and the heart and so forth. Then this is now my model. And fast forward, my mother ended up becoming child of immigrant parents, right? She is the immigrant, excuse me. She came from literally nothing, right? We think poverty is severe in the United States. You go look at the emerging market, you'll see real poverty outside of this country. She came from that and ended up being one of the highest paid women in the state of Tennessee for a period of time as a woman of color, right? As an Asian woman of color, right? And so when that, and I know I'm not alone in this, I think many of us have single mothers or growing single, but how many, I hate to cheapen this by doing this, but a fourth of us have single mothers, right? We all know this, right? And so seeing your single mother be able to be the center of gravity for both your home, but then also in the office, starts to reinterpret what you think is possible, not just for women, but for people in general, right? So it's absolutely her.
Thank you so much for that, Bing. Jean, give me something, brother. What was your moment? Yes.
How long you been with yours?
You got to follow Bing a lot tonight, so get
30
ready.
Look, you know,
He stepped back with leg crossed. It's going to be
I'm
good.
going to reflect on it because there's so many thoughts in terms of experiences. I think one pivotal moment for me, I have a sister who's a doctor. She's in plastics and she's here in California. And she gave me an example of an experience where she was about to present to some doctors, somewhere out here in California. And she walked into the room and they didn't know that she was presenting to them. So she basically walked into the room and they said, "We need coffee."
Yes, yes.
And she didn't say anything. She gave them the coffee. And they were waiting and they started making comments, "Where is this? Where is she? Where's this person? Where's this person?" So on and so forth. And then she put on her jacket and said, "Gentlemen, are we ready to begin?" So that was the moment in time.
I knew where you were going with that. I knew where you were going with it.
But that stuck out for me because, again, did all she had to do in terms of her studies, did everything she had to do in terms of passing her exams, and yet they still didn't want to give her any sort of credence in any way, shape, and form. Not just because she's just a woman, but also she's a woman of color.
Yeah.
So they completely negated it. And I think they were, first, my understanding was they were stunned as they processed it, but she also had to share her cases with them. And so they got a better appreciation for the work that she did. So hopefully it opened their eyes, but it certainly opened up my eyes.
That's
So
a
good
beautiful
example.
story. That is a really beautiful story. As you all are men of color and you all have to fight with your own isms, right? And fight against racism and what have you. But as we look to be intersectional feminists, right? I'm curious to how did all of you transition from not just focusing on issues that impact you to focus on issues that impacted women also, because there is a way that we kind of cheapen the work of our sister, Kimberly Crenshaw, and not actually just throw out the actual idea. But so how do you all live that in your daily lives of being intersectional folks?
Well, I think for me personally, I understand that I'm a man, I'm Latino, I speak Spanish, my socioeconomic status, where I grew up, a child of immigrants, all plays a major role in who I am. And it's a very similar case for my wife and for women in general, for people, women of color in general. So I think for me, I have to be self-aware and aware that they have it even harder than I do because they are women, right? So I have to be conscious of that consistently and have that top of mind that while I may have my own world and the things that I'm dealing with, for them, it's that much harder, right? And it's unfair, and then I always have to keep that top of mind when I am working with, when I am in matters of dealing with women and how they are able to fulfill their full self, right? So I have to. It's about consciousness, right?
Yeah.
It's having that top of mind that while I may have something, for them it's just that much more difficult.
You've been reading his bell hooks. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Bing?
No, I think I've made this mistake, but I think trying to appreciate and empower women, not in the way that you see as equal, but they see as equal, I think is the big divide. And I made this mistake where, I won't say which company, but one of my companies, we go out of our way to make sure, and we always have, that 50% of the senior executive leadership or whatever is half women, half men, right? And I know we'll talk about the transgender community in a moment, but for now it's 50-50, always. And I thought in my head, oh, you're equal now, right? We're good, right? Or at least we're a good step there. And I remember, I won't say who it is. We'll call this person Michelle for now. Actually, that's not androgynous. We'll call this person Aura. And Aura came up to me and said, hey, I just want to let you know, even like I appreciate the numbers, but the reality is some of us actually don't feel like we're heard, right? And so I think this was a learning experience, and I know this sounds so nuanced, but I think we all know what it's like to be at the table, but still not heard.
Yes. And
if we bring it back to the workplace, since this is ADCOLOR, even if you're heard, I think we all know as people of color what it's like to be talked over. And even if you're not talked over because you have a certain senior leadership, that doesn't mean you get promoted. And even if you're promoted, it doesn't mean you're C-suite. Even if you're C-suite, doesn't mean you stay. We all know this, right? And so I think that was a big learning for me, not just for women, but humans in general. Just like trying to get out of my own head and think I'm the sun, right? And just trying to understand how they see success and then how we systemically enable that as well. The other part of that, and I won't name specific demographies because this behavior does over-index in some, but certain demographies see the world as a little zero-sum for fair reasons, by the way. Not right reasons, but fair reasons, right? And I think they think that if you elevate women or anyone who's other, you suddenly at the expense of yourself, right? And I think one of the important things to remember about any industry is in order to calibrate sort of centrality or equality, you have to pull someone to another polarity in order to get back to middle.
Yes.
It's not about incremental progress. This is why things like the Me Too movement, even though it is sexual harassment assault, which is one of the most extreme forms of harassment, right? Sort of genocide, really, right? This is one of the reasons it's so vital, right? And why we can't just have a conversation of like, oh, you wrote an email, hi you guys, I'm offended, right? It's got to be something a little more dramatic because we all need to learn more rapidly.
Gotcha. Jean?
For me, I think the prevailing issue, I don't even want to use men of color, because when we start going there, it sort of takes away from the issue. It's about really making sure that we're very thoughtful about male and female equality, making sure that we are mindful of the fact that they need a seat at the table, and that we are able to do better work with them being at the table. And if you don't allow people to feel that they have a voice, and you're not able to support it, then it's all lost. So for me, I think in my role on the day-to-day basis, I get to deal with people like that in terms of my realm of influence. It's about making sure that women have the right voice at the table. They're represented. You're not catering to them. You're treating them as partners, and you need to understand, to your point, that they are at a level that you're at, and they're able to contribute in that exact way.
Wonderful. So my favorite person in the whole world is James Baldwin, and he wrote a letter to Angela Davis, and in that letter he had a quote that he says, your silence is not just criminal, but it's suicidal. So I'm curious for you all in the workplace, how are you using your voices to remove the barriers that women face in the workplace? And I'll start with you, Bing.
Oh, start with the baby. I'll give you one example. I actually signed an anti-defamation clause on this, so I can't specify who it is exactly because I care about
You putting in
my
work,
real estate.
man.
No, I follow rules, but kind of. Anyway, no, so at one of my companies, there was a executive who effectively sexually harassed a woman. This is before Me Too, by the way, so it's easier to say now, though still not easy. But I find that fireable, right? Period. And it's fireable for several reasons. Number one, it's not just a moral issue, and I'm not trying to trivialize morality. It's not just that, right? Which I think a lot of this movement, that's what it's been focused on. That has an indelible impact on the company at a transactional level. So if you don't have a conscience, at least think of your bottom line. Because what ended up happening was his entire organization, of course, found out about this, right? So suddenly they have permission to inch a little bit further than they could have before. They may not be sexually harassing someone, but they do have the ability to be a little more salacious, which is still holistically unacceptable. So I brought this up, of course, to the CEO, right? The CEO said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. Month goes by, he's still here. It's not taken care of as far as I'm concerned. So I go to the executive chairman of the board and I say, by the way, this person is 65 years old and a white heterosexual male. Those details are relevant. I'll never forget this. He said, Bing, don't be naive. This happens all the time. It's a true story. That's why I had to sign the anti-defamation clause, right? And that was the moment where I thought, no, it's true. This is all true. That was the moment where I thought, all right, and I'm not the hero in this, by the way, because like this still happened. So I don't have a time machine. I'm not God, right? So nothing is fixed, right? But that was the moment where I was like, all right, this is no longer acceptable. Fast forward, we got that motherfucker. Oh, sorry. We got.
Ding!
They said they wanted a real conversation, so we got it.
Don't hold back.
The men of color panel are not gentlemen, sorry. I'm from the South. But no, we finally got him fired, but unfortunately he actually did it again to someone else, and it took 2 times and his malperformance at a transactional level to have that happen. And so I think what I learned is exactly what Gio said earlier. You can't just be this, you have to be consistent, because one person meet was not effective. It happened again, right? And we can lament all day long as why I'm a meek Asian male, 5'10", I'm not 6'3" like the other one. Like, there's all sorts of reasons, right? I'm only shorter standing up, though. Don't you worry about that. So, next question, toxic masculinity.
We are going to masculinity next, so it's a perfect segue. But I'm going to
Next.
I want to share.
So I have to follow up behind
Yes.
that. Great.
You want me to come to Gio next? I can go to you. Okay.
I'm so sorry, Ms. Moore. Never be invited again.
Jean-Rene.
In my role as Chief Talent Officer,
You can't curse. We get that, yeah.
No, listen. In my role as Chief Talent Officer, in my role as Chief Talent Officer, I get the opportunity to push our worldwide chief executive's John Seifert's agenda, and his goal was to ensure that this organization is able to be representative in terms of its representation of women at senior levels, and to also make sure that we have a diverse and inclusive environment. And that's not an easy feat for an organization that is 70 years old. If you go back in time, what this organization looks like now versus what it started with, like with David Ogilvy, it's night and day. And it's not just about putting policies in place, it's about changing behavior. It's about holding people accountable. It is about making sure that they feel it in their pockets if they have to. And sometimes that is the one way to ensure that you focus on those priorities. As an organization, we've made tremendous strides. We've had our Chief Diversity Officer, Donna Pedro, who's been leading the charge for 13 years in terms of the agenda, laying down the foundation and the infrastructure so that therefore we can get to the place that we're at now, where we actually have a leader who actually embraces it. So now the goal for me is to make sure that it's not one, it's not 2 of us, it is 13,000, 14,000 people who have to be mindful of what they need to do to contribute to making the environment diverse and inclusive, and making sure that we keep, that parity and equality top of mind.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Gio.
So I think for me, it's about very micro situations, right? Understanding and recognizing that opportunity can always present itself at any moment in time. And I think for me, just one quick example was for me last year, actually, at ADCOLOR. Michelle Almeida, who is 2018 Miss ADCOLOR. Also shout out to Jess Chung, who's in 2017 Miss ADCOLOR. Both wonderful rock stars who work at Anomaly. But last year, Michelle, I remember this so clearly because
So do I. She worked with us.
So
They were fighting in the back
we
about
were fighting in the back. So I remember last year at ADCOLOR, I was at the buffet line, which you'll find me normally. And this woman comes up to me and just starts chatting me up. I had no idea who she was. She had no idea who I was. But I remember her energy, I remember her spirit, and I just remembered her go-to attitude. And I remember, and I still remember this, that after she spoke to me, she had made a beeline straight to our Chief Talent Officer, who also happened to be with me at that moment. And fast forward a few weeks later, I see her at our office. I was so happy to see her there. Fast forward a few weeks after that, and she is an employee at Anomaly, and she's a rock star. And so for me, it's about, again, those micro moments of being able to recognize when you see talent, when you see opportunity, so that then you can pass that forward and move that forward. And I think Michelle and this is really a message for all of you young people here, is to take advantage of the forum that you have here. And be like Michelle and just go out and start talking to people, because you just never know.
All right, so we've talked about the Me Too movement a lot on this stage so far, mainly being, but I'm gonna come to you third, right? And when I do workshops with men, one of the things that I realize is that we as men don't realize that the Me Too movement is women laying themselves bare to awaken us, to awaken us. So I'm curious that as you've read, as you've researched what has the Me Too movement awakened in you about how you can behave and act differently? And I'm gonna start with you, Jean-Rene.
You know, these questions are great. Again, I think about my role. It's something that I have to do every day. So I appreciate the Me Too movement in that it's awoke people, you know, men primarily in terms of trying to begin to understand the plight that women face. But day to day, I have those levels of engagement and interaction with people. So for me, it's about making sure that one, if I hear something, I act on it. If someone says something to you, you process it. You know, I always weigh the risk of the conversation with the individual in terms of protecting the person's perspective and their rights, but I'm also thinking about the organization and the implications for the organization. So I think for us, as we look at the Me Too movement and the level of awareness that it's created, it's about ensuring that, again, accountability is there and making sure that I hold my peers, my leaders, those that are subordinates in the organization, up to that standard, so that therefore this doesn't fall by the wayside. And you know, as I'm watching the Me Too movement, you know, we're sort of at an inflection point in our society right now. As you think about what this movement means relative to leadership, not just in our organizations, but in our country, in our country. And I think we just have to make sure that we provide as much support as we can to drive that agenda. So for me, it's something I deal with day to day, so I don't consider it a unique moment in time for me. I think it's highlighted now so that we have to take more action quicker.
How have the conversations amongst your senior leadership kind of pivoted or evolved because of the movement, the moment that we're in?
You know, I think men are far more aware, let's be clear, because men are losing their jobs. That's reality. I think we're moving from a place where it was kind of a joke to now realizing that every time you say something, you need to be mindful of what you're saying in terms of the impact. People used to always talk about, well, the intention. Well, intention has consequences also. So I think men are more mindful, certainly in terms of the conversations I'm having with my leadership around being more aware. So there's certainly a level of awareness that, you know, it's not just that you're going to be reprimanded. You may lose your job. And in losing your job, the circles are small. Someone's going to find out something in some way, shape, and form about why you left your organization. So we've had to make some tough decisions, certainly in the past year and a half, 2 years. Again, at one time, some of these things didn't matter or were more commonplace. We're in a different time now, and people just need to be aware of it.
Gio, how has the movement awakened certain things in you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's hit me like a ton of bricks that I don't know everything, right? That I need to learn that what I thought was right or what I thought was proper in many times is not, right? And I think I've learned that from women in my life, in my personal life, as well as the women that I work with as well. So it's a reality check, right? I can't mansplain everything, right? Because and I think it's put me in check more than anything else. And honestly, it's a work in progress, right? It's not something that just happens overnight. It's not something that you just flip a switch and you're there. And it should never be a destination. It's always, I think, a work in progress that you're constantly learning, that you're constantly putting yourselves in situations where you're able to absorb and then you're able to reflect. So for me, it's just an awakening more than anything else, and it's a nonstop thing for me.
Gotcha. Bing?
I think what Gio said is especially astute of this is a work in progress. So it's anything gives permission to other things to exist, right? And so yes, Me Too, predominantly with women, some men, right? But also invites conversation about orientation, about race, about religion, about xenophobia, and so forth, right? And that starts to enable sort of all sorts of other conversations and movements that are still happening, right? Yeah. That have not been fixed, not even close, right? So yeah, I agree with both.
So as we think about masculinity and manhood,
so
right?
sorry,
and because I do think that what happens is that, like, when we do get groups of men together, right, we start to perform, right? And I think it's natural for us to want to fit in, to be a part of the crew. But as you've grown up, you know, from a little boy to a college kid to an adult, how have your definitions of masculinity and manhood evolved? And I'll start with you, Bing.
man.
I don't think you shared that question.
Curse word, the salacious joke. All right. No, I think this will be annoying, and it probably comes from a place of deep insecurity, naivete, but then also deep confidence because of the systems I grew up in. I've never felt like a man or like masculine because I just don't think that way, and I know that's annoying. And there's a lot of like we're gonna overshare now. There's a lot of reasons why I actually should feel emasculated, right? So one, I'm Asian, which unfortunately before Crazy Rich Asians, R0 BC, we were emasculated, right? Like I was molested when I was 5, like I'm sexually fluid, etc. And so there's lots of reasons why I think someone like me should feel effeminate or emasculated, right? But I think I don't know what the single reason is. I think it's partly just growing up as a third culture kid in multiple places. I think it's just being embraced consistently and feeling lucky enough for my value, because as perhaps is self-evident, I don't stop and I don't take no for an answer, right? And it's just the way it is, right? And in some instances, particularly with whatever you define Trump as, particularly in those instances, if you're loud, you get what you want. I think, I don't know, I just feel like I've been able to persist. I think that the con of this, of course, is sometimes I can bypass certain elements of someone's identity that may be deeply existential and critical to how they manifest in daily life. So that's something I think I need to work on. But I think just because of how I've grown up, I see myself as just human, Like, I'm here for the exact same reasons we all are. This has been empirically proven. All we all want is impact and to love. That's it. Aristotle proved this. Harvard Business School proved this. The head of Intel's Research Center proved this. That's all we all want. It just may look different, but it's just the same, right?
I love that. Gio?
Yes,
give that a hand, yes.
I mean, I think for me, it's tough. It's a tough question because I don't think it necessarily deserves a definition, masculinity, right? Once you start to define, you start to put barriers and limitations. So for me, I guess if I were to sort of give my own personal suggestion as to what being masculine means, it just means being yourself, right? And being comfortable with yourself. And I recall just very recently there was a baseball game. The Atlanta Braves were playing, and there was this gentleman in the dugout who was crying, and his teammate
was rubbing his head just like
comforting
this.
him,
Yes,
exactly,
yes,
like, just like that.
Yes.
And the announcers were sort of making fun at that exchange. We come to find out after the game that the player that was crying had just lost his mother.
Actually, he didn't.
He didn't.
He didn't, no.
So, but either way, the fact that they were making fun of the fact that he was crying still goes to show that there is this antiquated notion of what it means to be a man, which you can't show emotion in this particular case, right? So I think for me, it's when we talk about masculinity, it shouldn't necessarily have a definition. It just shouldn't have barriers or limitations. You are who you are, and you are who as you represent yourself.
Jean-Rene, you got a lot to follow here, brother.
Yeah, but I think fortunately they've already built it for me, so it's kind of easy in that regard.
He's also CTO, if you didn't hear earlier.
Yeah. Listen, I think our view of masculinity certainly as I grew up, was defined in a certain kind of way. Obviously, being strong, being deemed as little in terms of emotion, if you will. As you've gotten older, certainly in your 20s and in your late teens, sexual prowess, marginalizing of women. And I think right now, we're at that moment in time where we have to change what that means. I think society is already starting to change that with the various movements that are there. But I think it's going to take a collective effort, because I don't think it's just for men to sort of define what that means any longer. Because to feel included, to know that you can be and have emotions, and to be able to display those emotions is something that we have to be able to do in our daily lives. And I have a daughter who said to me one day, "Daddy, you don't ever cry." And I looked at her and I was like, "Yes, I do." And she goes, "No, I don't ever see you crying." And it stopped me for a moment, because I was like, well, something sad or something, bothers me, I'll share that emotion. But she goes, "You never do it in front of me or Mommy or Jay or Dominic." And so for me, that means I have to be careful in terms of the behaviors that I'm demonstrating to my sons and my daughter, because it's almost like I defer to my wife to show the emotions.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like, and it's not like that. You have to be open, and you have to make sure that people feel that they can share who they are and what they are. So I think masculinity, manhood, all that has to be redefined, and it's being redefined as we go through life right now.
It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. I think the one thing that's just kind of self-evident is that like the four of us had a little bit of intimacy backstage, and I think it allows for a really rich conversation. I want to pivot to a word, and that word is feminism, right, or feminist. And I think that it's a word that oftentimes we as men are uncomfortable labeling ourselves as. How do we, as men, start to get other men comfortable not just with the idea, but publicly identifying as feminist? I'm going to start with you, Jean.
You know, last year I had the honor of going to Makers, and it was a very impressive experience for me as a chief talent officer. I remember. But, you know, it was an opportunity to see feminists like Gloria Steinem and a whole host of other important people who are advocates for the movement. And you know, I shared a piece after that because one of the things, since I had the privilege to go, was to go back and report. So I put together a piece that I think got picked up by Campaign about us being aware and us being mindful of what we needed to do with regards to the feminist movement. Because at the end of the day, whatever we do to prop up each other, male or female, is for the greater good. You know, I think we get caught up sometimes in, if I do this, will she get over in a certain kind of way? If I do this, will he get over in a certain kind of way? But I think watching that set of events over the course of 2.5 days, I came back committed, fully committed. And I'm already someone who tries to do it on a day-to-day basis, but my awareness was heightened, and I felt it was my responsibility to share that with my partners in my organization and in my social network. So that's what I did.
Nice. Gio?
I mean, I think for me, it's the word feminist, feminism should not be taken lightly, and therefore I don't call myself a feminist because I haven't put in the work that people that are doing it are as hard as they're doing it. So for me, while I am an advocate and ally, for me to call myself a feminist would be to almost downplay the work that's been put in by so many other people ahead of me. And then it allows for me to work towards something, like a Gloria Steinem. I am in no way in her league, right? And therefore I would never equate myself to her. So I think we can't take we can't take for granted that title or that label or that word, because there's a rich history, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of advocacy, there's people who have put their lives on the line for the movement. So for me, I just think it gives me something to reach towards and to work towards and use real feminists, real people who have put in the work as a goal for myself, right? So it's not a label that I take for granted. It's not a title that I take for granted. It just gives me something to work towards.
That's so thoughtful. Oh my God, yes. Bing, that's a tough one to follow.
I agree.
Oh no, I want you to, come on. Give me something.
Oh, I don't like the sound of my own voice, though. No, honestly, I think Gio said it right. I think said another way, a label is not enough. It was sufficient at a certain point in time with the Steinem and so forth, but it's also not enough, right? I also think, and this is what I appreciate what Gio said, can I call you Gio?
Of course.
All right. Well, Gio said, I don't know, Vonnie time. That's the last part of his name. All right. No, I think what Gio says, I used to think that if you were a strong empath, you could actually speak intelligently and accurately to someone else's plight. That is not true. You cannot speak to someone unless you are it completely. And by the way, none of us are everything, so no one can actually speak for anything. So I really appreciate what Gio said of, it's impossible as a man to say what a feminist is because we are not women, right? And even if we are women, not all women are the same, right? Madonna has this incredible icon billboard speech where she calls herself a bad feminist, right? She was chastised for being a little more exposed, right, for a certain period of time, but there was a reason for it, right? So I think that's that. I think the other thing is, if we cannot cater to someone's morality, if you don't get off on just seeing people self-manifest and just think that's the most beautiful thing in the world, then do it for transactional reasons. Because someone said this, and I tepidly agree with it, but she said that men have been running the world for so long, and it's not going well. That's also not the right answer, by the way, right? We're just dinging each other, right? It's an eye for an eye. The right answer is men have been running too much of the world, so it's been going one direction. And in order to evolve, if we look at things at a biological level, at a DNA level, it takes two forces to combine and hybridize for anything to happen, right? Always, right? Pepsi and Coke for good competition, China, US for good film. Like, it takes all sorts of kinds, right? And so if you're not, was that loaded? I don't know. So if I don't know. China. So if, I'm here to represent the most powerful country in the world. So anyway, all right, we're off topic now. No, so if you're not doing it for morality and you're not doing it because it is the right thing to do, period, then do it because you want to see tomorrow for our species, period. As far as I know, men can't procreate. We're not starfish.
Right.
You might be, I don't know. I'm not.
Oh, God, I'm loving moderating this panel. So we've talked about women a lot, right? And one of the things that I think often happens is that when we're talking about gender equality, we're thinking about cis women, right? So how do we make sure that when we're advocating for gender equality, we're really thoughtful and thinking about how do we engage and make sure that we're centering trans women also to embody the work of Bell Hooks that says you start with those who are most marginalized. And I'm gonna go to you, Bing, first.
Oh, I'm gonna get in trouble for saying this. This is the honest answer.
Say it.
Right? And this is inspired by Uncle Giovanni. I have not done the work here. Why have I not done the work here? Is it because I don't give a damn? Of course I care, right? Of course I care about everybody. But can I care all the time in a way that I'm proud and thoughtful and I put in the effort to what Gio said? No, I have not. So I can't say because I haven't put in the time.
That's a fair, honest answer. Fair, honest answer. So let me dovetail to that. Like, when are you going to start that work so that you can make sure that trans women are centered?
Well, now. So I'll give you two answers. Honest answer is not now because I need to go take a nap because I'm jet lagged after this. However, I will go read up on this tomorrow. Now, will I still be fluent and will that be fully exposed? Am I transgender or do I identify? No, so I still won't be able to speak fluently. But will I try starting tomorrow? Yes. The other thing I want to say, and this is going to sound real ethnocentric, but one of the reasons I was so inspired by this panel that y'all put together is because of how much tritely negativity there's in the world. I think one of the origins of that negativity is not giving our fellow species the benefit of the doubt. We think that just because someone doesn't say something or engage with it immediately means what? That they don't care. And not only that they don't care, they're anti it. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes silence is suicidal. Right? But in many cases where we're at least ostensibly amongst good people, that is not the case. It's because of time, it's because they're worried about other things. So I think that's the other thing. We're all struggling, we're all at war. We need to give each other a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes. That was my polite long way of saying cut me some slack. But I'm sorry.
No, so that's why I called you in and not called you out,
thank
right?
you, my man.
And if you want to read a good book, my sister Janet Mock's book, Redefining Realness, is amazing. It's a great, and Janet's a friend of everyone here at ADCOLOR. It's a great book to start with. Jean-Rene?
You know, in 1993, or maybe it was 94, I was working with the Gillette Company. And I had my first experience dealing with someone who's trans in terms of their transition. So Paul became Paula. And it was really challenging because I worked in a manufacturing environment with about 2,000 people. And, you know, this was like, you know, early 90s, so the perception of men, the perception of working in a factory or in a manufacturing environment was tight. And there was a moment in time where Paula wanted to use the locker room. And there was a huge controversy. And of course, here I'm coming in as a young HR professional, clueless about what to do with it, but realizing at that moment in time, she made a choice. We have to be supportive of that choice because at the end of the day, she's still able to do what she needs to do in terms of her performance. So I took a lot of heat in that moment of time. I think they questioned, you know, whether or not I was equipped or I was seasoned as an HR professional to deal with it because I think they wanted me to have Paula leave the organization. And, you know, call it naive at that moment in time. I said, no. I said, we can't do that. There's nothing that she's done that's wrong in her performance. She's made a choice, and we have to find a way to accommodate that choice. So, you know, I mean, for me, it goes back then, So as I've watched the movement and the progression of the trans community, I'm thrilled to see now that society is taking recognition, the right kind of recognition. There's still a lot of work to be done. But for me, again, in my role, I had the chance to experience that way back when, before realizing what it really was. So
That's wonderful.
good.
Now let's give that a hand. Like, that's a big deal. Gio?
Yeah, like Bing, it's a difficult question because it's a work in progress. I will say that for me, I try to listen as much as I can. I have my sister-in-law is she's getting her master's at the Columbia School of Public Health, and so she is very much ingrained with the LGBTQ community, works with a lot of trans people, and so for me it's about listening, understanding, and trying to immerse myself as much as possible. I by no means call myself an expert or fully aware, but I think, given my background and being culturally aware, culturally sensitive, and understanding the dynamics that play into who I am as a person, I then have some apathy towards this particular group of people, and I'm able to maybe relate to them a little bit better. But by no means do I call myself an expert. It's something that I do need to get myself very much up to speed on. And it's, we could start with the book you just recommended. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I asked that question with intention because movements don't come back, right? That if we forget our trans brothers and sisters and we move forward, they're still left behind. So I think it's really important that we center those, as Bell Hooks said, who are most marginalized.
And to that point, sorry to interrupt, I think it's also a lot of just being conscious of the language you use and sort of the words that you use to describe people, I think, is critically important. Yeah. And it can just be something as simple as that, as just being conscious of the vocabulary that you have can make a huge difference as well.
Yeah. So my last question is, as you think about how you get your friends, specifically your male friends, involved, and I've lost a lot of friends who are like, man, you care about this stuff way too much, right? How do you all engage your friends and get them to be a part of this movement? Because the gender equality movement doesn't just impact women, it impacts men too. So how do you bring them along? And I'm gonna start with you, Jean-Rene.
I talked about having attended the Makers Conference last year, and when I sent my note out, I didn't send my note out to my women colleagues or my women friends. I sent it out to everybody. And the feedback that I got opened up dialogue for me and my friends. I think the idea is to make sure that I hold myself accountable and manage the conversations. And if someone says something that's inappropriate, I check them. Not because of my job, it's because it's the right thing to do now. And it was always the right thing to do, but it really is the right thing to do now. So I don't take that lightly. I think we just have to be mindful that we are in a society now where, let's face it, men by our nature, we have all kind of biases. Society has given us that in terms of the influences that we've had. So if I don't take a proactive role in terms of helping to shift that and be mindful of my behavior, be mindful of the behaviors of those that I'm calling my friends, then shame on me, I'm not really doing anything. To do something in your job and then to turn around and do something different in terms of not acknowledging, not being aware, shame on me, I can't do that. So that's how I try and operate.
Thank you so much. Gio?
I think it's dialogue, it's conversation, it's honesty, not only with my friends, but even with family members, right, who come from previous generations and maybe don't have the right mindset. So I think it's really just about having conversation more than anything else. And if they truly are your friends, then they will listen. There'll be a dialogue, there'll be conversation, there'll be different points of views. And to what you said previously, if they need to be cut off, they need to be cut off. Right, because they just don't. They are not. You
got to take risk in this world.
Yeah,
yes.
You do. You absolutely do, because you don't need that type of energy around you, right? And it's not to say that I'm not willing to listen, but at the same time, you got to go.
Yeah. Thank you. Bing, close us out.
I just agree with both, right? No, it's true. Y'all clearly know what you're doing. No, I think it's consistently digging people. I'll give you an anecdote. So I have a boys club, it's called MSG. It's basically a lot of the top Asian dudes in entertainment tech. John M. Chu's in it, co-founder of Twitch, Kevin Lin, brother Kevin Lin's in it, etc. And we have a monthly supper club where we basically gas each other up and then flame each other back down. And And there's one instance where one of our two youngest members, who's 25, said pretty unabashedly, I want to date Tiffany of Girls' Generation. Now, for all of y'all who don't know, Girls' Generation is the biggest Asian group in Asian history, period. It's like Spice Girls on steroids, but lasted forever. Tiffany's the lead. She's about to break out here. And he was talking about it in a way that she was an object, right? And I've dated a pop star from Indonesia before, and so I know a little thing about this. And
Just drop that in there.
my country's bigger. That country's bigger than Korea. May not have as much money, but it's bigger. Anyway, that's not topic. But I think to Gio's point, it's not just having a conversation; it's understanding how to speak to people the way they need to be heard. Because he is not trying to be a misogynist; he's just saying what he thinks is right, right? And so instead, it's like, all right, well, let's start to Trojan horse this and talk about why you should never date a pop star. It's exhausting, right? And then let's talk about how you're actually latently speaking to something that's actually more, more challenging existentially, right? Yeah. Lo and behold, he's not going after her, by the way. Also because one of our other buddies also manages her, so we're making sure that doesn't happen. Asian mafia, y'all. Anyway, but I think, again, it goes back to, what?
I'm just watching Wade.
I'm sorry. No, but it goes back to, and this is gonna sound like a bullshit Hallmark card, but it's true. I'm sorry for cursing again, but it's true. Like not everything has to be a movement or a law. Those are great things. They have to happen to sustain. But some of the most important moments are what Gio said earlier, of those micro moments that are just consistent, right? Because not all of us can be God. Not all of us can be Amanda Nguyen. Not all of us can be, well, nobody wants to be President Trump, but not all of us can be like a president, right? That was petty, sorry. But no, it's consistently dinging to what Mr. CTO said.
Yes. All right, so let's give our gentlemen a big round of applause. We're going to exit stage right.